Hello everybody and welcome back to the farm. So if you've been watching any of the past videos, you've seen the creation of a field watering trailer. Now this project took roughly 2 years to complete, I should say 2 seasons, summer through fall, and it was finally completed in October of 2024, that is last October. Because this was such an in-depth build and spanned 2 videos set about 8 months apart, I figured it would be beneficial to put all of this build in one video as a comprehensive reference for anybody who wants to build their own watering trailer. So that's what this video is. Let's jump right in. If you recall, I purchased a trailer last year. This is a heavy axle trailer. It's about 4 feet by 6 feet with 2,000-pound axles. And my goal for this was to create a watering trailer that I could leave along the side of the field, solar powered with a 12-volt pump, and just feed water into the field. I also bought one of these plastic water tanks, and the intent is to marry the two together with some additional metal and pieces to create something that I could tow and leave behind. So fast forward a little bit to summer of this year, around July, and I figured it was time to start working on it because the trailer thus far had only been used to hold the dying remains of all the plants that I created last year that never got planted at my farm because my tractor broke down. I did give a bunch away, but I just couldn't bring myself to throw them out. So what I ended up doing is I stripped down the trailer of all of the old wood that was on the sides. Now you may remember my welder and my plasma cutter that I bought last winter also. These things work incredible. So I started the process basically by creating a bunch of stitch welds along these fenders. These fenders were only held on by 1 or 2 small bolts, and they were very wobbly. So I wanted to fix this. I wanted to make them integral to the structure of the trailer. So I did this on one side of the trailer, and then I moved over to the other side of the trailer. This metal is fairly thick. It's in some areas an 1/8 to 1/4 inch steel. So I had to grind down all of the finish that was on this metal, and I had to turn the power of the welder up fairly high to get good penetration between the different pieces. I also took this opportunity to go through and fill a bunch of old holes that were drilled into the trailer surface. I don't know what was mounted in these holes, but certainly for my use, they're not needed, and I didn't want any additional penetrations where rust could form or, things could go through. Now, in my process of testing this welder, I'm using flux cord solder right now. I didn't buy a gas bottle. I'm not doing gas shielding. I wanted to see at 208 volts how this would work with just standard flux core solder. And it works great. It's one of the best welders I've used. So the next step was to grind down some of the welds to make them smooth, and I'm using a flat disc sander wheel on here with a very coarse grit. And it worked fine. I didn't need to grind anything perfectly flat. All I needed was a good surface that paint would adhere to. And that was the next step, black Rust-Oleum paint. I purchased several cans, and I just went around and I painted. And I always seem to forget that I have this sprayer handle, a trigger handle for spray paint cans, which makes this process so much better. If you haven't ever used one of these, certainly go out and get one. So with a little bit of a time lapse, you can see that the transformation of painting the trailer really creates a nice end result with black Rust-Oleum and with that trigger. Now it's just a matter of applying some new wood. I wanted to keep the side structure fairly similar to what it was before, so I bought a bunch of pressure-treated wood, and I created side panels and panels for the front. And basically this was 2 rows, top and bottom, on both sides, and the front. and that seemed like it would be enough to keep everything contained in the trailer. So with a few taps, I sent it home, and the sides came out great. I spared you some of the details. But what I realized is that for the front of the trailer, I didn't have anything great to anchor the wood to. So I cut down some pieces of steel, and I welded on some tabs that went the full height, bottom to top, in the front of the trailer. So using the same welding technique, I just created some stitch welds, and then I ground them down and I painted them. The strength of these welds is really good with this welder, and I guess the technique too. I could grab these ears, these tabs, and I could shake them violently, and all that ends up happening is it moves the trailer. So these things are definitely on there, certainly well enough for some pieces of wood. And the end result looks really good once painted. So in the mock-up phase of this trailer build, all I did was drill some pilot holes and attach these boards with screws just to make sure that everything fit and was in the correct place. For the final attachment method, I used carriage bolts through all of the pieces of wood through the steel, and that is what holds everything together. But as you can see, the end result here looks really nice. So I know I'm going to get some hate on this video for sanding pressure treated wood, but I wasn't sanding this to do anything other than remove some of the burrs. So I'm not sanding pressure treated wood. But I did get the burrs off, and then it was just a matter of going through and using some Valspar deck stain. And I also recruited my mom in this process. This is my mom's YouTube debut. She helped me give a first coat to a lot of the boards that you see on the trailer here. And everything turned out very nice. Mom did a great job. This was a tedious process, but I really like this color for a very specific reason that will become apparent eventually. Orange and black.
I don't need to be on camera.
Yes, you do, Mom. Up at the front of the trailer, I ended up countersinking the holes that I drilled for the carriage bolts, because if I didn't, the carriage bolt head stuck out past the board, and because of the measurements of my front boards, it made it impossible for those to slide into place. So with the head countersunk, it created a nice flush surface, and then my front boards just slid right into place. So everything worked good. I did go over and stain those countersunk areas just for some water protection. And this is what the first step looked like. Everything turned out nice. Now, as you can see, I did paint this deck of the trailer with black Rust-Oleum. I rolled it on nice and thick because I also wanted to skin the deck with new deck boards. There was nothing structurally wrong with the boards that were on the deck, but I did want a nice, smooth, flat, new surface for bringing up the water tote and for mounting all the other stuff onto the deck of this trailer. So I just went right over the original deck with new deck boards, and that was fine. They screwed right down onto it, and the overall fit and finish ended up being completely perfect. There was no need to replace the underlying wood. Just give it a nice freshen up with some new deck boards. So once the new deck was installed and screwed down, the obvious next step was to use more of this Valspar deck stain and stain the entire surface of that new deck that I just put on there. So I used the exact same color, and I went through and I gave all wood surfaces 2 coats of this stain for maximum protection. I also flipped over the tote and I sanded, or deburred I guess, the bottom wood structure that the plastic and the metal connects to, and then I gave it 2 coats of the same deck stain. For aesthetic purposes, but also to help protect this wood, because once this is on there, I want it to be on there semi-permanently until something rots away at least. And then once everything was dry, it was just a matter of sliding the tote up onto the trailer. And when I tell you there's a 1/4 inch of space on each side, that's all there is. This tote fits perfectly. So I installed a bunch of D-rings onto the trailer, inside and around, and then I used some lag bolts to connect it to the wood. And my purpose of doing this is just for mounting points. Everybody needs mounting points on trailers, and I know what the purpose of this trailer is today, being a water trailer, but you never know when you have to mount something on here. So I went around the entire trailer and I put these D-rings around. Now, I guess I can help strap the tote to these D-rings, but the reality is once that tote is full of water, it weighs about 2,000 pounds. So these little D-rings aren't going to do anything to hold that sort of weight against gravity or motion. But it's good to have mounting points. So here's a midway walk around of the trailer. It's about 50% done right now. Of course, I have to add on trailer lights and redo the wiring of the trailer, but there's a lot more that has to go onto the trailer also, and a lot of this is going to have to wait for the spring. But there's still some construction that I needed to do, some metal fabrication, and that has to do with the solar panel. I bought a really large solar panel, dimensionally large. And what I wanted to do was take all of the components of this kit with a 12-volt car battery and mount them on the trailer so that this has perpetual power. And this is roughly where I want to mount this fairly large solar panel. I want to mount it up out of the way in the front of the trailer above the tote, but I still want the tote to be removable if it needs to be. So in order to do all this, I had to fabricate a stand for this panel. So I got a bunch of 1-inch angle iron from Lowe's, and I cut it to fit so that the solar panel had about 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch of play all around this structure. And then I just went through and I created some tack welds to hold it in place, just enough so that I could test fit the solar panel. And if everything goes well, it should fit right down into this structure, and it does. It fits perfectly. So now that this is in there, I can simply go through and finish weld it, which I did, and then take the grinder and grind everything smooth. Again, this is a flap sanding disc. And much like everything, it got a nice thick coat of black Rust-Oleum. Now, the creation of that was just one small step. Now I have to mount it up above the water tote. So I got more 1-inch angle iron and I created some vertical risers and I got it into place. And this is what the finished product looks like of that solar panel stand. Now I mounted this thing into all the key sections of the trailer for rigidity. So there's absolutely no flex to this. If I move this, the entire trailer moves, which is perfect.
And that marks the end of the first year of the project. I made some really good progress. I didn't finish everything, but I created a really stable foundation for the remainder of the project. All of the major work to the trailer was done, so now in the second season, it's just a lot of integration and finishing work. But in 2023, the winter came early, we had an early snow, things got cold really early, so I had to stop. So at this point in the build, it was simply a matter of waiting for the winter to end and the snow to clear so that I could restart the project in the spring. Well, it's been about a year since I started the creation of a field watering trailer. Last year, I posted part 1 in this series where we created a very nice, solid frame and infrastructure for the remainder of the project. As you recall, we have a very heavy axle trailer, a water tote, a large solar panel, and what remains is all of the detail work. Setting up the power, setting up the plumbing, and now fabricating some brackets to hold these boxes onto the side. This big box came off a trailer that I have, and this is going to hold the plumbing, the pumps, all of that stuff, and then the battery box. So let's get started. First things first, I chose a location to hold the battery box, and it's right off the front passenger side of the trailer. It doesn't stick out past the wheel wells of the trailer, the fenders. It's all tucked in nice and tight. So I just went to Lowe's, I got some angle iron, and I used some additional scraps that I had. In addition to my really awesome Harbor Freight welder, this thing works great. Probably the best welder I've used. And it's just a matter of welding these things up, making sure that they're solid, and then attaching the box to it. Now, as you watch this, you may be asking yourself, why didn't you put all of the boxes on the tongue of the trailer? And the reason is that on that trailer tongue, there's a lot of stuff. The trailer jack goes right through the center of it. There's a very thick metal bracket that has something to do with what this trailer was originally used for, which I don't know what that is. And then it kind of goosenecks down to the deck of the trailer. So there really is no good place on the tongue to put either of these boxes. So my thought process is that as long as these frames and then the boxes don't stick out past the fenders on the side of the trailer, then we should be okay. So now that the battery box is situated, I'm trying to figure out where to put this plumbing box, we'll call it, I guess, or a pump box. This thing is plastic. It's relatively shallow, it's about a foot deep. And this one is going to stick out past the fender just a little bit here on the driver's side of the trailer. But the creation of this is exactly the same. I used some of that 1-inch angle iron from Lowe's, and I just created a frame, a rectangular frame, and welded it to the side. Now the frame was a little bit wobbly, so I did a few things. I stiffened it up with some flat stock, as you see here, and I also put an angled piece that goes from the corner of the bracket all the way up to the actual upright metal portion of the trailer frame. And once I had all of that on there, it was very stable. So while I have the welder out, the next thing I wanted to do was tackle this hose reel. I picked this up off the side of the road. Somebody was throwing it out. It still works, it's just rusty and there's some holes through the metal. So I ground off most of the rust, and where there are holes, I'm just filling it up with weld. And this should be fine. If I have to buy a new one eventually, that's fine. But for right now, I figured grinding down the rust, filling the holes with the welder, grinding everything smooth, and then giving this a fresh coat of spray paint, this should last me a couple years. As long as the plumbing portion of this reel holds up and I don't, spring a leak from the side of the reel where the hose input connects, then I should be okay. So welding this up only took about 10 minutes, and then I ground everything smooth, and this portion of the project was also done. Next up with this hose reel is just a few coats of spray paint. So now that the fabrication is over, now comes all the rest. The first thing is dry fitting all of the boxes.
that I made brackets for. And this plumbing box, I was surprised how well it fit. When you have boxes like this, you have to take into account a little extra on the back for when the lid is open. And I did, and the top of the lid does not hit the trailer at all. So once I realized everything was good to go, then I spray painted it. And this is a very exciting step in any project for me, because it means that the rough stuff is done. And by rough, I mean like fabrication and construction and that kind of stuff. And now it's finishing and detail work. It's always satisfying to get a coat of shiny black spray paint on something that you're building. So once I had this bracket done, I went over to the battery box side. I primed this one already because the metal was a little bit rustier. And I test fit the battery box. Everything fit fine. So this side also gets a nice glossy coat of black spray paint. So the fabrication work should all be done now on this trailer. There shouldn't be any more welding. At this point, it's just a matter of electrical and plumbing. So let's mount the boxes so that we could get to that next step. This battery box has 4 little tabs that stick off the front and back of the bottom. And with that battery box in place on this little bracket, I marked out where those 4 holes should go through those little tabs, and I drilled them out. Once they were drilled out, I tossed the battery box back up there, made sure that all of the holes lined up, and I dropped some bolts. So now these bolts are a little bit too long for what I needed for this particular application, but I had them laying around, so I'm going to use them. Once everything was bolted down, I test fit the battery. The battery fit perfectly. And now it's a matter of wiring up this battery box. So this battery is connected to the solar panel. And the interface between the battery and the solar panel is something called a charge controller, which is this little white box here. And I wanted to mount this box somewhere inside the battery box, but I didn't really want to screw it or rivet it to the wall. I need access to the wires and to the display. So for now, I figured why not just zip tie it to the handles of the batteries. There's plenty of vertical height in this box. And once I did, it was actually pretty rigid. It didn't wobble around too much. I also bought some aftermarket connectors for the battery that had wing nuts on them so that I could just wing nut wires onto the battery clamps, or the battery posts. So after I mounted those on the battery posts, I started connecting all the wires. So on the battery, you connect a red and a black wire, 12 volt positive and ground. And then you connect those into corresponding terminal points on the charge controller. So the battery is hooked directly to the charge controller, both posts. And then you attach the red and black wire from the solar panel into corresponding terminal posts on the charge controller. So what this does is that as sunlight hits the solar panel, it goes into the charge controller regulates the voltage, and then charges the battery from the solar panel. So this 12 volt battery will continuously be charged from the sun as long as it's outside. Now that charge controller also has overcharge protection so that it will maintain the battery at a constant 12.4 volts, and that's where it'll stay. Now we're going to see the panel in just a second, and I believe it's going to be around 14 volts, which is normal because that's the charge coming in from the sun. This solar panel is producing 14 volts, and then the charge controller is pushing out 12-ish volts to the battery to keep it charged. So that was it, just 4 wires, and the electrical portion of this process is complete, at least for the battery box. Now I just connected the back hinge and then connected the front latch, and there we go. The battery box is complete. Now I can move on to the things that are going to use the power from the battery. And to do that, we have to go around to the other side where we're going to deal with the water pump.
So exactly like we did with the battery box, we first must mount this box down to the frame that we welded up. And this was just dropping a couple bolts down through the box, through those flat metal bracing pieces, and then connecting it with some washers and nylon nuts down underneath. So once the box was in place, any wobble that still occurred was gone. This box firmed everything up, and it makes an ideal container for the pump. So I drilled a hole through the back of this box to receive the red and black wires coming from the battery. These red and black wires are going to power a few things. It's going to power the pump, but I also created a little switch panel out of some scrap metal and some 12-volt switches that I had laying around. I put 4 switches in here, and this way I could power 4 other things if I ever need them. Maybe lights or some other 12-volt accessory, cell phone charger, who knows. Today, I have a requirement to power the pump, but I don't know what'll come tomorrow. So I always like to build in some flexibility. And once they're connected to the battery, as you see, the switches light up, the power on the pump comes on, and then these are just there for when I need them. So there we go. The wiring is done. Everything works. So with the power taken care of, now we could turn our attention to the water, which is a much bigger job. But overall, this whole power setup came out really nice. The 2 boxes mounted nicely, the wiring was very simple, and everything looks good. So on to the plumbing, and for this plumbing job, I'm going to use PEX because I have it laying around. For the water tote, I bought a kit of adapters, and these adapters go on the large 2 or 3 inch outlet at the bottom of the tank, and it allows you to hook things up like a hose or other quick attach things. And I'm going to use a hose connector to connect into some PEX pieces, which will then feed the 12-volt pump. So I redid my house with PEX about 3 or 4 years ago, and it worked out great. It was very easy to work with, and I figured since all of this stuff was laying around, I'm going to use it. I also mounted this little basket. This basket came off of the hose reel that we're going to see in just a little while that I'm modifying for use on this trailer. This little basket was the perfect size to hold some stuff that came with the 12-volt water pump, the hose and the nozzle. So I tossed it all in here, everything fit, and it's just out of the way. I ran the PEX tubing down the length of the trailer between the water tote and the lower board inside the trailer, and then I kind of snaked it out behind this plastic case. I have all of these fittings that I now need to drill holes for inside this little black case where the pump lives. So right now I have the PEX zip tied to different parts of the trailer just to hold it in place. And the first thing that I'm going to put in is kind of a through wall interface. And these are used for brewing, I believe, but they're gonna fit the hose bib that I have perfectly. So I'm gonna use it here. And basically it allows me to screw in to the back of this case and then also screw in from the inside of the case. That way if I have to take the stuff out, I don't just have a blue PEX line running straight through this case. It's modular. I can take things on and off as needed for maintenance. So I installed the bushing and the nut and the washer, and this is ready to now have the PEX cut and mounted. And I did the exact same thing on the other side of this black case. So I have one for water inlet feeding the pump, and then I have one for water outlet, which is the output of the pump that's going to go to the hose. And the process was exactly the same. I put this through wall adapter in there, put on the rubber bushing, and that was it. So now here's the inside piece. This is just a hose thread bib. I wrapped it with Teflon tape, and at this point I don't have the PEX fitting crimped down because I want to be able to turn this and tighten it into that through wall fitting. So once I have it tightened down and I have this fully connected into the pump, then I will tighten down the PEX crimp fitting and I'll be good to go. So again, this is one side of this connection. I have to do the exact same thing to the outside portion of this fitting on the case. So this is the exact same fitting that I just put into the other end of the PEX. I'm just testing to make sure it fits, which it fits fine. And then I'm going to cut this piece of PEX to fit so that I can get the barb into the piece of PEX and then put the little press clamp fitting on, and then I'll be good to go. Now the thing that this screws into on the pump is plastic, so I have to be very careful when tightening this down. I'm only going to give it 1 or 2 twists with a wrench just to make sure that it makes a really good seal. Last thing I want to do is break plastic pieces on this pump. And what this screws into is basically an inline water filter. So once I have this in and tightened, then I'm just going to put that piece of blue PEX tubing back on it, and then it'll be time to call this portion quits and then just tighten down those little PEX fittings using a special PEX tool. And this is exactly what you do inside the walls of your house. I did it for my entire house, and the system works great. I'm a big fan of PEX. So if it worked inside, I'm sure it'll work out here. And this is that crimper. You just tighten it down, squeeze it tight. Eventually there's a little light on it that pops on that lets you know that you've finished the compression. And then you twist a little piece on the crimper and it releases. And that's a watertight connection right there. We'll do the same thing on this side, and this one single elbow will be complete. Simple as that. Done. So now what we're going to do is spin around to the other side of the pump, and we're going to take care of the outlet side, and that's what we're doing right here. Wrapping Teflon tape around this other fitting, which is the exact same one that we just used for both of these pieces on this side. I have 4 of these fittings, and those 4 fittings are going to take care of the internal plumbing inside this case. So we're going to wash, rinse, and repeat. Do the exact same thing all over again. Feed this in, hand tighten it. We'll give it a few twists with a wrench just to make sure that it's snugged down. I don't want to push anything too tight because a lot of these pieces are plastic after all. Now this one that you're seeing is going to go into the outlet side of the pump, and just like the other side, this fitting on the pump is plastic, so I'm being very gentle here. I'm going to hand tighten it. I'm going to give it maybe 2 twists with a wrench just to make sure that it's seated fully. And then I already have the blue PEX pipe ready. There's a little crimp on it on one side. We're going to do the same thing, measure roughly where it needs to go. Cut it with the PEX cutter. Put a little crimp on that end. Crimp it down. Same process. Hand tighten. Twist the release lever onto the next one. And after 4 or 5 squeezes of this tool, the PEX fitting is fully clamped on, and it's a watertight seal. So the plumbing inside this box took about 5 minutes. And here it is, complete. Inlet on the left, outlet on the right. And there you go, the pump works. Now I just have to connect the rest of the water line. Previously you saw me test fit this particular piece in place at that lower outlet of the water tote. But I took it off, put some Teflon tape on it, and now I'm installing it for its final time. I want to make sure that everything has Teflon tape on it and that I have a nice waterproof seal. So this one piece gives me a hose connection, and that's great, but I want to put on a Y-splitter on the end of this hose connection because one side will feed the pump, but there may come a point when I don't need the pump. I just need to get some water out of the tote quick. So I want to have the option to either divert water to the pump or to whatever, a small hose, a bucket, something else. So this is that Y fitting. This is just a common thing that you see on houses for gardens. Nothing special about this. And now this piece of Blue PEX is what feeds the pump in that black case. This is a PEX hose fitting. So I crimped it on, putting a washer in it, and once I connect it here, the plumbing is done. Tighten it down, and now when I turn water on, that water will go right to the pump. Everything fits. This is perfect. So that's the plumbing done. Now on to some of the detail finishing work on the trailer. I need to get lights and a license plate and wiring taken care of. Now fortunately this trailer already had brackets on it for trailer lights. I simply bought new trailer lights that are LED because the old ones were broken and didn't work. And that came with a wiring harness, which I'm also replacing because the wiring on this trailer was bad. So I stripped it all off, and this is the passenger side LED light. And then I'm going to do the exact same thing on the other side. Now this process also involves some crawling around under the trailer to fish wires, because the wiring harness is sort of like a Y. One branch goes to the driver's side, one branch goes to the passenger side. I'm zip tying all of the wires as we go and making sure that the job is finished from the front to the back so that I don't have to crawl under the car a third or fourth time. And this is the driver's side with the license plate bracket. Everything went on easy, and once the wiring is complete, I'm just going to use this as a license plate. In New York, if you have a dedicated pump trailer, you don't need a license plate for it, so long as you identify it as a pump trailer, and in my case it's for farm use only. So this is this portion complete. So once all the lights were wired up and the license plate was on, I spent some time and I wrapped plastic loom around the front portion of the wiring harness for the trailer, and that'll keep everything nice and neat and tidy and situated. I could zip tie it in place and we're good to go. Now moving back up to the solar panel, I set the solar panel in its bracket that I made above the water tote, but I didn't have anything to mount it with. So I bought these little rectangular metal pieces from Lowe's, and I drilled some holes in them to act as a bracket. And then I bought this material off of Amazon, and this is like black neoprene, but it has some kind of diabolical adhesive attached to it. My fingers are getting stuck to it. It's hard to pull my fingers off of this material, and as you're going to see in a second, it's so sticky that it left all the residue on my fingernails, and it took days for this stuff to come off. But it does provide about 1/8 to 1/4 inch of padding, and this padding is going to be pressed down against the solar panels and hopefully provide a little pressure to keep them in place. So I did this for 4 of these metal pieces, and I have 4 partner brackets that are welded on to the framework that I created for the solar panel. So this is the piece, and that's the foam, and I just put it in place there, and you're going to see a nut and a bolt go through it, and once these are tightened down, that solar panel can't go anywhere because this is flush against the metal. So this is holding it in place. Again, there's 4 of these brackets that I welded onto the framework, and I tightened them down, and that's the solar panel complete. And now we're in the home stretch. These wheels bothered me because they're kind of gross and rusty. So I got some wheel paint, and it's kind of like a dark metallic color. So I put some index cards around the rim, and I'm spray painting these wheels. There's some rust preventer in this paint, and it's very glossy. And while it does look black from this angle, it's not black. It's kind of like a graphite color with metallic flake in it. So hopefully this will just improve the overall aesthetic. And aside from the aesthetic, I'm trying to take care of any rust also. I don't want the rust to get worse. So every bit of rust preventative and coating that I could put on these things will give me just that much more use. And now this looks 1,000% better because the color is uniform, it's nice and shiny, it looks new, it looks clean, and in my book, it's all about improving function and appearance. So then I went around to the passenger side and I did the exact same thing. I set up the index cards around the perimeter just to keep the tires clean, and then I sprayed the paint onto the wheel. Hopefully from this angle without the sun you can see the difference. It goes on nice, it goes on shiny, there's no runs, and I'm being careful not to hit the tires. So I did this in 2 separate passes. I gave it a really light coat, and then once I had all of the index cards, I finished the first light coat, and then I gave it a heavier second coat. And that filled in all the nooks and crannies, it covered all the rust, and it gave the wheel a very nice uniform look. So if we take a walk around, this is almost the finished trailer. But the tires look great, the wheels look great, and the only thing we have to do now is take care of the rear portion of that trailer. So wheels are done, 100% better. Now we will move on to the final portion of this project, and that is the hose reel and final testing. So before I painted this up, I just wanted to make sure that the hose actually worked. This hose reel worked. So I turned on the power, there's water in the tote, and just like I had hoped, water is being pumped to the hose reel, and the hose reel is not leaking, which is really important. So now that I know everything works, I spent some time and I gave this a nice thick coat of black Rust-Oleum. I turned the reel, I painted this from all angles, I gave it 2 really good coats, I covered everything, and at this point all the rust is gone, everything is covered, the reel is glossy black and protected, and like I said, even if this reel only gets me a year or 2, it was free, so I'm happy with it. So as you can see in this clip, the fall leaves have fallen. We're in almost November right now. This project has spanned the summer. So all I'm doing here is drilling a few holes down through the lower metal bar into the wood, and then I am bolting this hose reel right to the wood of the trailer. I don't want this hose reel moving around or going anywhere, so bolting it right down to the wood of the trailer prevents that. And here we are, we have a 100-foot hose that I'm now feeding into the central spool of this reel, and hopefully this is going to be the last time that I have to worry about putting a hose on or off this reel. We are just about done. There's only one test left to do. Fortunately, this hose reel is big enough that if a 100-foot hose isn't enough, I could actually fit probably another 75-foot or 100-foot hose right on top of this, and that will definitely span the entirety of my field. And here it is, complete. This is the finished product. This is what I've been hoping for the 2 years of this build. Everything is together, everything is mounted. I have a little storage space off to the right-hand side of the reel if I need it for anything. And this is the final test. As you notice, I'm leaking some water. So I'm doing a final tightening, and I turned everything on, fingers crossed. And aside from me not having the nozzle set up properly, there we go. This is the end result of this entire project. I have enough pressure from that 12-volt pump that I can hook up a hose nozzle, and I have lots of different patterns. I have 100 feet of hose, so I could either set this up as a soaker, I could just have it dump straight from the hose into the field, or I could put a better nozzle than this on it and have some control over where the water goes and how much water there is. All in all, this is a project that I can now say is done. So to cap off the completion of this project, I wrapped everything up. I made sure everything was nice and tight. I put a tote cover on the water tote. You could see that green cover. This is a product that they sell for water totes. It keeps them UV protected and clean and dry. And then at this point, I'm just blowing all the leaves off of it, getting it ready for its maiden voyage. Once it's clean and wrapped up, my truck gets backed up to it, and we're going to load this up and bring it to the farm. It moves around easily. All of the controls are lubricated, so I'm able to lift and raise it. It connects nicely to the trailer. This entire trailer, top to bottom, has been rehabilitated through this 1.5 or even 2-year process. The electrical is all new. The chains are new. Everything's new. It hooked right up, and now that all the final connections are done, I made it to the farm. And the watering trailer is going to go to its final resting place in the rear of the field. So as you can tell, we're in late fall here, and although I'm not going to be using this water trailer at all this season, I wanted to put it in place. I wanted to get a feel for where it's going to go. I wanted to make sure that it sits properly, it's level, and that everything worked. So there you have it, a 2-year build, or 2-season build, to create a field watering trailer, or a portable watering trailer, created almost entirely from products sourced from Facebook Marketplace, or even garbage on the side of the road. Of course, there was the purchase of some wood and screws and paint finishes and all the raw materials, but really this was an economical way to create a watering trailer compared to buying one already made that runs in the thousands and thousands of dollars. Are there other ways that this could have been done? Absolutely. I could have used a gas-powered water pump instead of the entire solar setup that I created, but for what I wanted to do, this seems like it's going to work for now. The benefit is that the foundation is there, the watering tank is there, the trailer is there, so if in the future I need to adjust things and go in the direction of gas, I certainly can do that. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope it was comprehensive enough. There's a lot more content coming, so please stay tuned. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next video.